your host, Emma Thomas, and joining me today is Lyndsey Simpson, who is the founder and CEO of 55 Redefined. Recognising a gap in the market for a brand that answers the call of the bet your ass I can over 50s, Lyndsey set up 55 Redefined to fly the flag for those who may be getting older but have no intention of slowing down. Their consumer lifestyle site, Life Redefined, now has a global audience of over 125,000 over 50s, and their Work Redefined and Jobs Redefined sites enable businesses to attract, grow and engage the over 50s talent and consumers, and is solving age strategy for the world's largest firms. Serial entrepreneur and a regular commentator in the media, Lyndsey has been recognised in the UK's top 35 businesswomen by Management Today and the Sunday Times, and is one of the UK's most inspirational female entrepreneurs. Welcome to the podcast, Lyndsey.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm delighted to be here.
That's quite the intro.
If only I don't disappoint, hopefully.
I'm sure you won't. So I'm very familiar with the work of 55 Redefined, but maybe for those who are kind of coming to this for the first time, can you sort of take us back to the point in time where you decided that this was very much something that was needed, and how did that all kind of come together?
Yeah, of course. Well, it was about 5 years ago now, and I was in my very early 40s, and I was the CEO of a HR and recruitment outsourcer. And I was gunning on retiring by the time I was in my mid-50s, quite frankly. So that was my life's ambition, to retire at that age. And I'd kind of got a bit of awareness of ageism around the recruitment lens, because I had a growing database of older candidates, and then an increasing volume of briefs coming into our business for up and coming talent and people that are moldable, shapeable, and not at the peak of their career. But there was a real tipping point moment for me, as I say, 5 years ago. I received a call from NatWest, one of the big four UK banks, because they had been instructed by the regulator, the FCA, to unpick a whole region of work that they did in the 1990s, almost a decade's worth of advice. And thus they needed bankers from the 1990s to do the work. But the regulator wouldn't allow them to hire alumni, because they would be marking their own homework, so to speak, and recognising the names in the files. And so they couldn't find anybody, because by this point, all those bankers from the 1990s were retired, because they were in their early 60s typically. And so they contacted me, because I'm an ex-banker by background, by career. And so there's like, well, you understand the world of banking and what we're looking for. You understand the world of recruitment. Where do we bring people out of retirement? And so I love solving problems. And the answer wasn't on any of the job boards or LinkedIn or digital platforms, because they weren't hanging around on there. And so I literally got my phone, my Barclays number from when I started in the 1990s, and looked up ex-colleagues of mine that I hadn't spoken to for over a decade, and just gave them a call out of the blue and asked them, were they enjoying retirement? And did they want to come back to work for 6 months as a contractor through my business? And in 8 weeks, Emma, I hired 400 people out of retirement with my mobile phone. It was certainly a wow moment. And it has just, ting, 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 light bulb going on, really. The first light bulb was, we're not 1982. I'm not building an outbound telephone business here of, tell me the names of 3 other people you've got in your phone. And so there was a real lack of a digital marketplace for talent, of people in their 50s, 60s and 70s to search for and apply for roles with companies that weren't going to waste their time. So that was kind of first mission, and that was the premise of Jobs Redefined, actually. Let's create a job board for people over 50 and only allow advertisers that genuinely want applications from people over 50. So that was that piece. But the bigger piece, and the rabbit hole that I then went down, 5 years ago, which I'm still continuing down and getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the depths of those burrows, is something's changed. Because when I spoke to those 400 people, they could all afford to be retired. This was not a money thing. They all had nice lives. They were, pursuing hobbies and, seeing their friends, seeing their family. Yet every single one of those 400 people shared that the biggest mistake of their life was retiring.
Wow. Yeah.
It was the biggest mistake of their life. And so I suddenly started to get interested in this and go, well, I myself was targeting that very thing, an early retirement. I thought that was success. That was,
Yeah,
you've
you made
achieved, you've
it.
made it in
You
life. If I
made-
can retire early, a bit younger than my pals, then somehow, I'm one-upmanship. And so I started commissioning research into the topic, like, have I just randomly picked bankers and maybe it's just bankers, or is it everybody in any geography? And it turns out that the answer is yes. The world has changed, and nobody's really caught up and got the message. And so yeah, we've added 30 healthy years to life expectancy. So when we created this term of retirement, it was a post-war construct. It was to give people 2 or 3 years of support post serving in the World War. It was never meant like a 30, 40-year gig, and longer than your career. And so, Sarah, it all needs redefining. So that was my moment. And yeah, 5 years on, we've got a number of businesses that are solving for these challenges.
Yeah, and I think it's Aviva Wittenberg Cox, isn't it, who talks about these 4 quarter lives now. So many of us potentially living to 100, that actually we talk about midlife, but actually if we're going to live to 100, then 50 really is that midpoint, isn't it? So
Correct.
far from kind of writing us off when we're in that third quarter of 50 to 75,
Yeah.
that's a whole different ball game now to what it would have been, I don't know, when my grandmother was hit 55, who I always thought of, was old the entirety of the time that I knew her, really.
It's exactly, well, it's a brand new life stage. In fact, the scientists among us have named it gerontolescence. Terrible name, but it's a bit like
Mouthful.
adolescence. It's a second adolescence, and so people who are in the 50 to 75 life stage are healthier, wealthier, have a completely different physiology and psychology to their forebearers. So they are nothing like their parents. They don't dress like them, they don't think like them, they don't want the same things. Yet the world society kind of is still sleepwalking into the same patterns of you should retire, you should become a grandparent, you should stop what you're doing and do some gardening. And I'm not denigrating any of those things and activities, but there's not enough for people when they're going to then be in that period of life for 40 plus years. And so there has to be a blend. And certainly what we see is that work is the core pillar of that, purposeful work activity. And that doesn't mean doing what you've always done. It doesn't mean it has to even be paid, but there is something about the fact that we're going to have this blended third quarter, to use Aviva's phrase of that third quarter life, where work and life blend rather than, this 3-phase life, which was, education, career and retirement. I think that 3-stage life is dead. And what we've now got is 100-year blended life of living and working in harmony in our third quarter and well into our fourth quarter, actually.
And that's going to look different for everybody. We're not a monolith, and obviously, we can talk in general terms. But I think one of the most staggering stats is that, so within the next sort of 5-6 years, so by 2030, 50% of the workforce will be 50 or over in the UK, and similar in other parts of the world.
Correct. In fact, in parts of Western Europe, we're already there. So, if you're in kind of Italy, Spain, Germany, they're already nearly there. But yeah, the UK, just shy of 50% will be over 50 by 2030. And so it becomes, from being a niche characteristic, we talk about older workers as a hidden talent pool, and and we talk about age as a diversity characteristic. Age is a protected characteristic, but actually that population will make up the mass of our working population. They'll make up the mass of our general population and are the only growth talent pool. So if you're employing people, the only growth pool of people you can hire into are people aged 50 plus. And if you're selling to people, so whether you're selling, mortgages or handbags or anything in between, the only growth consumer pool are people over 50. And what's interesting is when you then overlay wealth, Emma, because in the UK, 75% of the wealth is held by 50 to 70-year-olds. So again, if you flick on Instagram or if you flick on kind of the TV and you look at our advertising, it's skewed to youth. Yet the people who are driving the majority of digital spend, and by 2040, 62p in every pound spent online in the UK will be by an over 50s consumer. So that creates a generation of opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, for companies to start getting it right and creating brilliant products, services, solutions for people now that don't currently exist for this generation who are nothing like their parents.
Mm. And presumably the best people to sell to that kind of demographic are people in that demographic. So
You are quite right. Yeah, mirror demographics is a big part of what we do. So, I won't lie, we work with massive companies, the Amazons to AXAs to Diageo, Barclays. They are great companies, but none of them are coming to us because they want to be nice to older people. That is not their number one business driver.
surprise.
It is to solve for business challenges. And so one of the things that, to that point around demographically mirroring consumers, is we see that when you do that, so whether you're, in a retail store, so, been working with EE, and you've got a big disconnect between the average age of an EE employee in a store and the average age of a customer that walks into store is about a 25-year disconnect. And so what happens is when you start increasing the age of the people mirroring, and this could be in a store or a contact center, or if you're ringing your bank to report a bereavement, what happens is you get a better customer outcome if the customer is mirror matched. So, and equally with more challenging customer queries, like complaints or financial difficulty or bereavement, actually the older the person that's answering the phone or dealing with the query, the more life experience they have and the reduction in complaints and the better customer solution. And so, if I'm ringing to speak to somebody about a pension, I kind of want to speak to somebody who's got a pension. I don't want somebody who's reading a product fact sheet. I don't want to buy a mortgage from somebody who's never had a mortgage. I want to buy a mortgage from somebody who's been through that and has bought a property and knows the stresses that I'm going through as a consumer. So I think we're going to see a huge shift to this. And it's not just around those customer service type areas, it's also around product design, and it's around marketing and, even in the advertising space. So some of our more recent age inclusive companies in that space, like Publicis and Dentsu, who produce TV ads and, big campaigns. It's like, well, if you're going to sell a Volvo, you need to employ somebody who's been in a Volvo, and so you're starting to see this brilliantness, which is multi-generational teams being pulled together to create brilliant products, brilliant advertising, where you've got every age in the demographic represented in the workforce. But that hasn't been the point up until very recently.
Yeah, and I think it was just in the last week or so that some research came out talking about the number of recruiters who considered 57, I think, to be too old to go for pretty much any job. And think, God, what's it going to take? At what point are these people going to realise that they're missing out on this huge talent pool? And that is obviously what you're trying to address. But do you think it's going to be a sort of a gradual trickle down from the likes of the companies that you are working with, and people will see that the sort of the success that they're having?
Yeah, well, I think if I look at the recruitment industry, and let's tackle kind of that challenge, and it's one we're doing head on actually with a number of, rather than us trying to tackle things bottom up, we often try and go top down. So we go, who are the biggest influencers in this marketplace? So, Alexander Mann Solutions, AMS, for example, they are one of the biggest worldwide recruitment outsourcers. They run recruitment for everyone from HSBC to Deutsche Bank to BAE and, everyone in between. And so, we will go, well, let's fix it with them, because then, we can solve suddenly for hundreds of thousands of people in an area. But there are three key areas, Emma, that we see change the dial with these ageist services that we see come through recruitment. The first is around data. The second is around education. And then the third is creating intergenerational teams. And if I pick them off, what does that mean? So the first one around data. So people will have stereotypes, and they will be mislaid stereotypes because they don't have the data. So they will have, these recruiters will be serving hiring managers that will be saying, well, I don't want to hire somebody over 50 because they're more likely to get ill. We've come out of a period of, COVID pandemic with worldwide campaigns saying if you're over 50, you're vulnerable, go and shield indoors, and so people have this latent stereotype that old equals ill. And so the data knocks that out the park. An employee over 50 is 200% less likely to take a day off work sick than an employee under 30. And so we then look at absenteeism, and we look at attrition. So, line managers will go, well, why would I want to hire a 62-year-old? I might only get 1 or 2 years out of them before they're going to want to retire, whereas I can train and invest in a young person and have their career. And so we then look at the data, and the data is that an over 50s candidate is 5 times less likely to change jobs in the first 18 months than a candidate under 30. So actually what happens is the data proves these stereotypes wrong. So that's the first piece. Second piece is around education. So I have yet to find an employee in these parts of our businesses that understands their own longevity. They are all underestimating their own life expectancy by 25 plus years.
Really?
Everybody seems to think that they're going to die between 75 and 80. And the reality is it is 100. It's currently 82 if you're aged 82. If you're aged 40, it's 98. So nobody talks about lifespan. We talk about life expectancy, which is about people in that age cohort at that exact moment in time. And so when you start to give education around our longer lives, and that they are going to be working in their 50s, 60s and 70s, and there is almost zero chance of them wanting or needing to retire before the age of 75, then we start to share the message that if they don't take action now, they're just going to discriminate against their future selves. And then the third piece, which is around intergenerational teams. So it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of someone who you can't imagine. When you were 20, Emma, imagining yourself at your age now, it would just be mind-blowing. You would have thought you could be old. When you think back to what people in their 40s and 50s were, you thought they were old. And so the only way we can start to solve that within businesses is by creating these blended teams. So rather than recruiters having an average age of 27, which is normally the average age of recruitment companies we look at, we say, right, you need people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s and their 60s to work together as a team doing recruitment. And then you get rid of some of these biases that come in through that process. So there's no magic wand, there's no silver bullet to some of this stuff, but presenting the data, giving consistent education, and then actually changing the makeups of the team so we have representation of different ages, that then sees that within about kind of 12 to 18 months, we see significant changes in those organisations.
One of the other things I'm really interested in hearing your viewpoint on is around sort of flexibility, because for a lot of people, if they are going to be in the workplace for longer, they're not necessarily going to want to be doing, 5 days a week, 9 to 5. Leave aside the whole return to office kind of debate that's going at the moment, but that requires a much more radical change in terms of flexibility of sort of job design or around kind of what companies expect from employees. Are you seeing the companies that you work with understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a mindset shift on both sides of the equation. So it's not just the corporate. We as individuals also need to take a bit of a hard, long look at ourselves and give ourselves a talking to. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So you're right. So flexibility is actually, so across all of the research that we've completed, flexibility is the number one thing that would keep people in work for longer. So when you ask people why they retired, and particularly why they retired early, it was that they couldn't either balance other commitments. So perhaps they're caring, up to elderly parents and down to grandchildren as the sandwich generation that this is. Or perhaps that they're just bored. It's like, well, just because I've been an accountant for 35 years doesn't mean I want to be an accountant for the next 20 years. Or sometimes it's that they just want to live. They're like, well, I want to do the 3-month tour of Australia. I want to go and travel, and I can't do that if I'm going to get 25 days holiday a year. And so these pressures mean that people withdraw from work because they see it as an all or nothing. I'm either working or I'm retired.
Yeah.
And so if given the option, if there is more flexibility, and I don't just mean compressed hours and doing part-time, I mean, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I'm going to work 6 months, I'm going to be retired 6 months. These types of radical shifts in working patterns will mean that in our experience, people will never want to retire. Because if I can do all the things I've been saving for retirement and still keep my hand in and work and have that challenge, that purpose, social connections, earn some money, why would I ever want to give that up? The only reasons I'm giving it up is because I don't have the time to do the things that I've been wanting to do. And so flexibility is key. The bit that requires a bit of a talking to for ourselves is that we have been trained, particularly in Western cultures, that our careers are kind of up or out. They're in a linear direction where every move is upwards and every move comes, and every year comes with a pay rise. And so there becomes
for the next promotion and the next one and the next one.
Exactly. And so there becomes a point that we have to accept that money doesn't equal purpose, money doesn't equal happiness, and you will cap out with years of experience at the top level of pay for what companies are prepared to pay for certain roles. And so we have to accept that if we want more squiggly careers, to use Helen Tupper's brilliant phrase, I love Helen. So if we want squiggly careers where we're going sideways, backwards, or we want to negotiate pay for flexibility. So, I want to do this. I want to give you my experience, but then I want to do this. Then we have to realize that then pay comes off and the curve comes down. But that's not bad because your alternative is earning nothing and being retired. So it's almost like, and I know, factually, from thousands of people that, have kind of gone, oh, why, that's the definition of my self-worth. I can't take a pay cut. They're not paying me what I'm worth. When you then speak to them kind of 18 months out of work, they would be working for free to just come back and get the interaction and the challenge that comes from work. And so, it is a bit of both sides. We're trying to fix companies from the inside out and make sure that these new pathways, ways of working are designed in to working practices. And we have loads of companies that are doing this work. And then we need individuals to realize that actually they can negotiate what they want and they can give up the things that were important to them in their 20s and 30s when they were in wealth accumulation and buying their first property, and make different decisions that suit their life stage in this point in their life.
I think it's particularly pertinent for women, given the sort of the pension gap, which I don't have the exact stats to hand, but it's horrendous.
Emma, I am absolutely that. So by the age of 50, a woman's pension is 39% lower than her male equivalent. So you're quite right. And also we outlive men. So it is even more important that women earn. And so actually one of the fastest demographics that we're seeing return to the workforce are women in their mid-50s that perhaps haven't have worked for 15, 20 years. Kids have gone to university and they're like, my time. I can now start again. I can become an apprentice. I can go back to university. I can get skilled and I can have a 20 to 25 year career without childcare. And so, we're seeing loads of people come back in that space. And we partner, there's a midlife female platform called Noon, which Eleanor Mills runs. And so we power all of their career content and their job board. And we're seeing huge demand from women that are prepared to, again, go back to entry-level salaries, which they would have accepted in their early 20s, because they're going to get a qualification, a new career and training and a career journey that they can then grow from. And as you say, the alternative is nothing because they haven't perhaps been earning for the last 15 years.
And what about for individuals who haven't kind of necessarily had that career gap, but are maybe getting to, for whatever reason, whether it's sort of redundancy or anything else that finding it a real struggle to get back into a new role? Do you have any, I mean, other than going and looking at your fantastic job board, but kind of dealing with that entrenched sort of ageism and or launching back into a very, very different jobs market than what they might have been used to if the last time they applied for a job was 10, 15 years ago, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, there's a lot of content online around this, around, how to do your LinkedIn profile and etc. But the big question I'd be asking people is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's a genuine question, because I think we lose sight of that. We ask that question a lot when we're in our teenage years and when we're starting out in our career, and then we lose sight of it because we've landed in an industry, or we've done something that our parent particularly wanted us to do, or we've done something for other people. And so, if you can combine your career with something that you're genuinely interested in, and this, then you really are, you're sorted for life. And so people are their worst enemy by not applying for opportunities in things outside of their sector. It's like, well, I couldn't go and work for a bank because I'm 60 and I've never worked in financial services. Well, I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can. There is a shortage of talent coming through to every single industry that we work with. And as long as you are prepared to reskill, and as long as you are prepared to invest in your own growth, then there is nothing stopping you. We're hiring submarine engineers for the atomic weapons establishment, for people that have never worked or been near a submarine in their life. We're hiring robotics engineers for Amazon, from retired people that are, tinkering with radios and pulling apart cars in their sheds of a weekend, and saying, well, why don't you do that with robots and sprinkler systems in our distribution warehouses instead? There's a shortage in the upholstery industry in the UK. So, you might have had a little side hustle that you like, making curtains or reholstering fabric. Well, there's a chronic, these are crafts that people are not going into. So if you want to buy commercial furniture, there is a chronic shortage of human upholsterers. I can literally could go on and on and on and on. And so what happens is people limit themselves. They either limit themselves because they're going senior to junior. So they think, well, is it socially acceptable for me? I was a telecoms executive, but I'd quite like to be a postman. Am I going to get laughed out the room? Or can I do that and get my 10,000, 20,000 steps in a day and get fit and do something that I want to do in my 60s and 70s? And the answer is yes. And can you go the other way and start on a new career? You could go and be an advertising executive. You could come and join an insurance company on their apprentice level programs right now and work alongside people at every age group at your progression and start again. So the only thing that really holds people back is their own confidence to apply for these things, or what they think other people are going to think and believe about earnings or previous experience. But if they can kind of have confidence to go for this, then they should. The second thing I would just add is that the fastest growth in all new startups in the UK is over 50s first-time entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So the other thing we're seeing is a massive group of people that are going, screw it, why can't I start my own business? And so if I'm getting knockbacks from the industry that I want to work in, well, then go and build your own company in that industry.
And they're more likely to succeed as well than starting off.
On every single metric, Emma, they're more likely to scale, they're more likely to be profitable faster, and they're more likely to survive the first 3 years, which is the most challenging in a new business. And so again, we're seeing companies that support that new business infrastructure. So Barclays as a bank, or Virgin as a startups incubator, we're seeing them skew their support to over 50s first-time entrepreneurs, and brands that hire what would be typically known as franchise partners. So McDonald's, Specsavers, who do you want to come in and buy into a franchise? Well, you want someone with life experience. You want someone who's done a few different jobs in a few different industries, who has a bit of cash to be able to invest in a franchise, but has the life and people skills to be able to turn their hand to recruitment and marketing and sales and running a business, but under a franchise. So there are loads of, franchise and partnership opportunities out there for people in their 50s. Again, and I'm going to give you a brilliant example now of my brother, Emma. So my brother's called Darren. And in his late 40s, he'd been working for Asda supermarkets for over 30 years as a store manager. So petrol stations, chemists, retail, grocery stores. And if he had to spend another Christmas in an Asda...
another bag of sprouts.
with another bag of sprouts and another freezer load and sleeping through Christmas. And so he was moaning, as people do, and go, well, but I don't know what I can do. It's all I've ever done. I joined them at 16. It's all I've ever done. And well, our dad's deaf. And so I'm like, well, you're interested in audiology. Specsavers are one of our clients. I know that they will put you through university. So why don't you re-qualify as an audiologist and then go and buy a Specsavers practice? And that's exactly what he's done. So he's just graduated.
Brilliant. Well done, Darren.
In 18 months, he's become a fully qualified audiologist, but he's stood there alongside all of the young apprentices, and he's just bought 3 sites. And he's now going to be running, rolling out Specsavers audiology in those. And importantly, in his 50th year, he's going, well, my sister-in-law, his wife, is a brain injuries nurse. Well, she could retrain as an audiologist, and this could be a family business, and we can see the next 20, 25 years of our lives building this. Whereas 2 years ago, he was like, well, I've worked in retail for 30 years. What can I do? So I think it is just sometimes you need a bit of a poke from a stick from someone like me. And if you like that person, then read Life Redefined, go on to Life Redefined and look at the stories of our redefiners and people that are shaking things up. But sometimes it is a case of just having that kind of conversation with yourself and going, what is it I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? And how do I make that happen? And ignoring the white noise that is social expectation or family expectation that you can't do this. And believe me when I say that you can.
Yeah, really inspiring. And as you say, we could have another 25, 30 years of doing something you absolutely love instead of the kind of trudging back and forth to something that doesn't kind of really light you up inside. So that seems like a perfect place to wrap up. Thank you for chatting to us today. I'm feeling very inspired. So what are the URLs for the sites? We'll put them in the show notes.
Yes, of course. So for just life inspiration, it's life-redefined.co. For people that are searching for jobs, then they would go to jobs-redefined.co. And for anybody listening, if they're a leader and they're thinking about this from their company perspective, or equally, if they want to look at any of the research and the resources that we produce, then they would head over to work-redefined.co. But, across all of those 3 businesses, some are B2B, some are direct to consumer. The bit that ties us all together and our kind of purpose as an organisation is to enable everyone everywhere to be inspired and not retired. And so I hope that's the feeling that people are leaving with that have been listening to this podcast. And, you are now in control of what it is that you want to do to redefine this next stage of life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I hope if you're listening, you have been inspired. And if you do go out there and make a career pivot, drop me an email because maybe you could be a future podcast guest. Come and tell us all about it. Lyndsey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.